Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, where I have, shall we say, a very special, legendary guest, Josh, who I've recently been connected with through Matt, my other half. So you two did some education together a few years ago, and today we're going to be talking about injury prevention with training, but of course, the rise of biomechanics and how that world is taking off. I'm sure people sometimes see it and maybe think, I don't know what this is, so I'm just going to not go into it because it almost seems so overwhelming at times. I'm sure you would agree, Josh.
Yeah, biomechanics is in the last, I'd say, probably what, five years.
Mm.
Yeah, the level of education has kind of shot up like so much, which is a good thing. I think people it is overwhelming. I definitely understand that, but I think the greater awareness of like how exercise influences our body, even on a basic level, is still something that we should consider. I think a lot of people would basically like their previous training was essentially centered around like what other people did, and it's like that's how we've always done things, and everyone has gone through a training phase where they've copied the biggest guy in the gym, or they've just gone online and they've not really taken their programming or what they've seen as their programming at face value, and they've just kind of run with it.
Mm.
And that is also part of it. Part of it, I do consistently say on my with my content is a lot of it is trial and error. Like there is a lot that looks really cool in theory, like especially when you do all the maths, and then in practice, it just does not pan out the same way.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely find that when I take particularly, new clients that have done training plans from, something on Google, or, they've done what they think is best. And then when you get them on a specific plan that's aligned with their goals and them as a genetic individual, it's like, wow, I'm suddenly getting, benefits that I never thought possible. And it's like you've done something completely magic, and it's just being bespoke to them and actually taking into consideration them as an individual rather than Google or wherever it is. It's so overpopulated, it's very hard to know where to go.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I would say the more time I've spent with it, the simpler my programming it's become.
Yes.
I don't know if you found that yourself, but like
Yeah.
as much as you say your knowledge is like at a level X, you're still like probably one level below when it comes to your programming because you don't want to obviously overwhelm your clients. If you have clients who are at the same level, then that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
But you still want to make sure like it is as effective as it is on paper as it is in practice.
Yeah, for sure. I've had this in my own journey as well, and it sounds like you have. I used to literally, I talk about this on the pod all the time, go for like 10 different variations of glute exercises and all the different things that seemed, in the spotlight on Instagram and what have you. And when I actually started to build glutes was when I simplified it, stripped it right back and did the, a set amount of exercises and did them properly and just did it consistently.
Yeah, that's it. That's always going to be the deciding factor, isn't it?
Mm.
I will have a post on this probably by the time you've released this. But one of the biggest things I see when people talk about like exercise design, and I think this was like forgotten very quickly because it looks good, is like, can you actually overload that like week by week by week by week and actually get like a long concurrent positive outcome from it? And if you can't, then it's like, I don't care how good it looks, just do something else.
Yeah, yeah. And when you first started going into education and training, etc., where did you sort of come from? Have you had a sporting background as a child, or is that something that was new as you?
No, I didn't really have the typical like training background. I was active as a kid, but like I basically trained a lot when I went to university because my degree didn't really interest me that much, and it was like it's the same reason every guy goes to the gym. It's like you want to feel more confident, you want to look better.
Yeah.
I think when I started university, I was probably like 57 kilos or something like that.
Mm.
So it's like a good 20 kilos later, and like when you're 5'8", 57 kilos is fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and like the more time you spend doing it, the more, and obviously you enjoy it, you just become more invested in it. And then um, I'm I've got a very, how do I describe this? Like I do hyper focus on things, so it was very easy for me to okay, cool. I like doing this. Like how much can I learn about it, and how much can I apply it? Doesn't mean it's a good thing, but it did kind of leave that kind of I don't want to say obsession, but like more of a what's the word? Oh fuck yeah, obsession, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It's striving for more all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's relevant in the bodybuilding realm, I would say. I've been there as well, Josh, where everything's neurotic, everything has to be exact, and that obsession nature. And then that can, like you say, it can be good and bad when you're competing. Obviously it can be good in regards to a prep, but then you've got to try and manage things like stress, and that can become a stressor because everything has to be perfect and nailed all the time.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
It's crazy, this realm. So at the moment, you do gym training, or what are your sort of goals in specific to your physique?
At the moment, I would probably say this is the least I've trained like a bodybuilder, but
Yep.
ironically, the best I've felt and looked within my own physique. And I think that's probably from a lack of emotional attachment to the training and the result the training's meant to get. Like I did powerlifting prior to this, and it was the same kind of thing. There was a massive emotional attachment to the exercises that came with it and the outcomes I thought that I was going to get,
Yep.
and that was great. And I still look back at like the things I did then, especially at the body weight I was at, and I'm like, wow, that was insane. But I also think of like how injured I got from that,
Yeah.
and that kind of cascading, and that's fine. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with the sport just because someone gets injured for it. Like one thing we'll probably talk about is like some people are just adapted to certain things, and some people are just not. And
Yeah.
you're not going to find that out until you work at a higher level within that skill. But for me, it was a really cool eye opener of like, God, this is like absolutely killing me, and I've got no idea why. And then like we had that kind of massive surgence of biomechanics education of like, you shouldn't use barbells for hypertrophy, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do this. And then that kind of sparks that, okay, well, what is the alternative? What is the thing that I quote unquote should be doing? And
Yeah.
then you kind of go full circle. You go back, oh, actually, barbells aren't actually that bad because if you look on social media, I'd say 99.9% of competitive bodybuilders now are still doing RDLs and deadlifts off the floor, and
Yeah.
they're pretty damn strong. They've got pretty good glutes, pretty good backs as a result. But it's more like, is this adaptable for this person? And is this going to be something I can consistently load throughout, not even like a training phase, but like my actual career as a bodybuilder, powerlifter, whatever your sport is?
Yeah, for sure. Something that I've touched on before is that, making the programming appropriate to the competitor. And when you make that exercise selection, there's things that I would prioritize in, say, a prep. It might be that we start to bring stuff out like a deadlift that's going to be very CNS taxing, and exchange that for something that's potentially going to be, a bit safer, a bit more easier to load certain muscles and keep the competitor a little bit safer in regards to what the injury risk could be as well. There's certain things that we consider as someone goes deeper into a deficit, and then as we come out of that, you can start to reprogram. But there's so much to consider, and I think what you touched on there about the emotional connection to certain exercises is very important, because I've been there myself. We think that a certain exercise is going to be good, and then you become married to that exercise and you love it, and it's like, I can't imagine life without it.
Yeah, exactly. Like as much as I love deadlifting, I know the more I just load it up, it just fucks me up.
Me too.
It just doesn't compute.
Yeah. And this is probably deadlifts is the main one that, like you said right at the start, you see what the big guy in the gym's doing and you think, well, I need to do that to get results. But, I've done it myself. I've worked with clients and I've come away from certain exercises and still got, probably better results. And it's in a safer environment, in inverted commas. I'm not saying that deadlifts aren't safe, but the CNS taxing alone is incredible compared to, other exercises you could choose.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider when you're programming something like that. Even as a bodybuilder, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when we talk about avoiding injury as a bodybuilder, it's quite a broad subject, but is there certain things that you would say are more prominent than others when you would look to program for a bodybuilder to look down this route?
It's a weird one because obviously, like I said, there are so many factors that go into injury. You can't. There's this really big misconception that you can predict or prevent injury, and
Yeah,
sometimes they just happen. Bodybuilding's an interesting sport because, like, respectively, you're quite safe. You're mostly doing sagittal plane movements. You're in fixed positions. You're using machines, and like people, you do see like those horrible Instagram videos. People do get injured on machines, and usually it's people who use too much weight and not enough control. I would say that if you are competitive, you're probably not doing that. You have a good idea of what you can actually load up. And if the more competitive you are, I imagine you probably don't have as that much of emotional attachment to the load you're lifting because you're just using that to create a certain outcome with your physique.
yes.
With regard to avoiding it, I'm a little bit biased. Like bodybuilders, I think because we've gravitated toward these like optimal movements, all these machine movements. There's a lack of like being able to tolerate like normal positions. I hate the word functional. It's just it's overused, but like I
Yeah.
don't see many bodybuilders do like split squats, for examples.
Yeah.
And then you get conversations where it's like, yeah, but they just kind of fuck me up. And I'm like, well, do they fuck you up because they're not right for you? Or is it because you've kind of deemed the machines as the optimal thing and now you're just really untrained from those positions?
Yes.
And bodybuilders, they tend to have very similar like postures and positions based on the muscles that they're growing. So you tend to see certain patterns like compression around the lower back, not a load of hip mobility. And for some people that is true. So some people aren't. Like you see some bodybuilders who are just fucking freaks. They're flexible as hell, and it's
Yeah.
incredibly unfair. Um, and so it is kind of this thing you have to juggle. I do think genetics are a big part of that in the same way you have like long muscle insertions, long muscle insertions, short muscle insertions. You've got people who can just tolerate positions loading and who are potentially more mobile
Yeah.
and they don't ever train out of those positions. So they always keep them as they start to build muscle. Whereas you get other people who kind of go, oh, I need to train in my active range of motion. Their active range of motion is piss. So
Yeah.
they're overloading a range of motion that isn't large in the first place. And
Yeah.
they're wondering why the second they go out of that, even with moderate weights, they're like, God, I can't do this. This hurts.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, well, you need to work on that like foundation, whatever you want to call it, first, and then start to load up. The
Mhm.
problem with that is obviously bodybuilders, you're usually on a timeline. You have a certain amount of years within your career. If you've got very big goals, you know, there's only a certain amount of years you can compete and prep. Muscle building takes a hell of a long time, especially at the standard that bodybuilding is at now, even with assisted athletes. So you're kind of like, well, if I know this builds muscle, I'm probably going to do what I'm going to take whatever quote unquote shortcuts I can, and then I'll deal with the mobility restrictions later down the line if I have to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a mindset. I meet bodybuilders that are older and have been doing it for a while, and when they're on stage and doing the routine and everything, yeah, they look fine. And then at home and normal general life, it's like like you say, the mobility and just getting up and down off the sofa and things is a struggle, but you wouldn't know that when you see them up on stage and enjoy
No, no way.
and but it is something that I do yoga most days. I really prioritize. I speak to clients about doing this type of thing just to keep the flexibility. And I remember when I first sort of started telling people I do yoga, they're like, what, you're a bodybuilder and you do yoga? And it's like, well, you're trying to do what you can to stay mobile.
Yeah, also like I mean, if I had to give any bodybuilder incentive, is you have to present yourself on stage. You have to contort your body into certain positions. If you don't have the ability to rotate your thoracic spine or get your hip into certain positions, and that's limiting your ability to show that physique, then you should be working on that. And some people can get around that, and some people can't.
Yeah, yeah. And it's in a bodybuilding prep in particular. Yes, we've got a lot of boxes to tick, as we say.
Yes.
And I would say it gets harder sometimes to prioritize yoga and things like that. But I always think, like you say, when I'm on stage, I want to be able to hold my own. I want to be able to pose in the right way and effectively as possible. And I can't do that if I neglect the self-care elements of it. But of course, you get fatigue as well, and you think, oh God, there's some days I'm looking at the yoga mat thinking, do I really need to do that in a prep? But you've got to think of the longevity. Although, unfortunately, like you say, it's like, well, I'll deal with that later. But then you're left, 40, 45 years old and you can hardly move.
Yeah.
Mm.
It is a balancing act, and it's the same way with when bodybuilders take anabolic steroids. Like they know exactly what's going to happen in the future,
Yeah.
but they know it's, well, I have this window of time where I'm going to be able to perform at X capacity, achieve X goal.
Mm.
So you just kind of bite the bullet. And issue is that some people can do that and walk away without any issues. And then you get some people who, like Ronnie Coleman's the example that everyone uses at the moment. Like, he was absolutely insane, looks incredible, insanely strong. And now I don't know what his current situation is, but I know he's probably still in a wheelchair or has lost a lot of muscle. I don't know what the actual injury he had was, but I remember he had quite a few surgeries. And it's like, was that because of the drugs? Was that because of the amount of weights he was doing? Like, you can't say, oh, you're training like this, and that means in X amount of time you're gonna have a fucked up back. Like, there are people who train with shit technique and they're absolutely fine. It's just the fact that some people they can just tolerate it, and also they've trained like that their entire life. There's a PT I know from London who, like, he had like a 330 deadlift for reps, and like fully hunched back, like insane physique, and obviously assisted. And you kind of look at him and go, well, that's the position that he can load that movement and get the weight off the floor. If I try to go to him, okay, cool, we're going to like, really straighten out your spine, like shoot your hips right back to the wall, and I gave him not even 330 kilos, he probably would injure himself because it's a position he's just never loaded before.
Yeah.
So the body will adapt to what it's given. That doesn't mean you're going to get a positive result out of it that helps you within your shows, but it's just the fact you have to understand that you need to learn what things invoke a positive outcome with your training and what things don't, and not be too hung up on what other people are doing and what results they're getting from that. And with
Yeah.
social media and bodybuilding, it's really hard to not do that.
Yeah, for sure. You just end up, scrolling through and what have you, and you think, oh, well, that would be a good idea for me. And the similar sort of tone, when I work with new people and they're sort of chasing this DOMS type effect, or training should really hurt, or in the bodybuilding realm, going to war, which Matt and I joke about all the time. It's like, you're not going to war, you're going to the gym and then having a hot shower. But it's this sort of chasing, like, you want pain from training, you got to be in pain, and this type of thing. And as you know yourself, with your training and working with clients, when you're an experienced weightlifter, you don't necessarily get DOMS per se. You can feel you've done a workout, you get some CNS fatigue, etc., but don't need to be chasing DOMS for it to be an effective workout. And like you touched on earlier, I make pretty simple programs with effective exercises and selection for individuals, and I don't want to piss around with all the accessory moves and everything. It just needs to be effective, and that as well goes across mesocycles, macro cycles, not flitting from one exercise to the next, because we're not magpies, this shiny object. What's the new block gonna have? Well, very similar exercises because they're working.
Yeah, that's a big like pet peeve of mine, is the changing program very, very frequently. And like I train in two gyms that have like in ridiculous amounts of kit, like Northlands Prime, Cybex, all the big names that everyone loves to like travel across the country just to train because they've got this one squat press. And
Yeah.
like, I did that when I was in London. Like there was generally a point where I think I trained at 3 different gyms. It didn't last very long, but the variety of kit there was like it was so great. But I didn't do it enough to see any kind of long-term response.
Yeah.
And you lose out on so much adaptation when you don't spend like weeks and weeks on those movements. And yeah, you can argue there's a potential of like overuse injuries coming into play, and that definitely happens, especially as you start loading up. That is another quote unquote risk. But you want to grow that muscle, you want to get stronger at that movement, you got to keep doing it. There's a reason why people who are in strength sports are very good at those 3 to 2 barbell movements, is because they just do them all the damn time.
Yeah. And it's everything's focused around that. I've got a friend that's a powerlifter, and everything he does, like 5 warm-up sets, then he goes into the first working set, another working, and then the rest in between is elongated, so it's 3 minutes and it's 5 minutes, and then it keeps going, and he's in the gym for hours. But he's
I remember those days.
yeah, and it does, I used to dabble with it when I first got into training, sort of deadlift, bench press and squats. It's very empowering. You know what it's like. You get that deadlift, you get that lift, and you're like, yes, you're so empowered, you feel so good. But then, of course, going into bodybuilding training, it was more specific to the aesthetic rather than what I can lift, and my activation, my intention when I train, which really I think people should probably focus on more, rather than trying to PB every session. Because again, progressive overload's thrown around and people maybe don't understand it. Maybe we could talk about that. If you were progressively overloading by weight, how would you keep up in the weight every week for X amount of time?
Yeah, there's a point of diminishing returns on that. A lot of the kind of the weekly progressions, I would say. I mean, again, it's really hard to say I know exactly, because I only see what's on social media. I only see the people in my gym. I'm not that person. But a lot of the weekly progressions I see are mostly shortening range of motion, increasing tempos, or decreasing like time in eccentrics or pauses, or whatever the hell the standardization of those reps initially are. That standardization just disappears week by week, and it gets slowly worse. And then you kind of have I need to regress my technique back to this because I've got too far ahead. I was like, no, if you just had the standardizations in the first place, you wouldn't have to do that. and you would just see slower progressions of weight on the bar, but you would actually still be able to do that for a longer period of time instead of having to take another step back. And injury is exactly the same thing. The best thing you can do to progress in any sport, not even bodybuilding, is just not get injured. Like, because you have to take 2 steps back, you have to take the other 2 steps forward to get to where you were, and you've lost time as a result of that. And now you have to keep going forward, and you've got this. Well, I know this will. I know I have this kind of discrepancy or this weak point. Now I have to have that in the back of my mind while I keep starting to push forward. And like, if you're prepping, then fuck, that's another thing you have to worry about.
Yeah, because when you're prepping, you're under a lot of stress, pressure, etc. Anyway, and of course, depending on what category you're in, you're going to need to get pretty shredded to get stage lean, and then you are at a vulnerable position. I think sometimes when you're in a prep and you've got the tunnel vision and what have you, you think, no, I'm good, I can do all of this, and of course you're doing more cardio, more expenditure. For girls practicing on our heels, everything's against joint health, against general health. Yeah, everything. And this is something that, I talk to a lot of people about. This is not a healthy sport. It is extreme, if you're going to push to those depths. So then when it comes to your training, particularly I'd say for myself in the last 8 to 10 weeks, maybe of a prep, my training changes to pretty much maintenance. I'm going in.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. And because you can't expect to keep progressing, I go into every prep thinking, right, I'll lift what I can now for as long as possible. But of course, things change as you get leaner and you're doing more expenditure, you're eating less. Got to think of the bigger picture sometimes. But I don't know if you've dealt with people that are in a prep that you do become that sort of, I can do anything, I can keep going.
Yeah, it's I can't say I've prepped anyone myself, but I can understand the feeling when I've done those like very aggressive fat loss phases, and like, because you see the physical response of what those training sessions are like, especially when you look in the mirror, and then you pick up a dumbbell and you're like, God, these like 5 kilo lateral raises are just like the heaviest thing in the world. Like, what the hell's going on? Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of what we said about only you can't progress all the time through prep. And I know people who definitely force it, and I've definitely seen that. And you won't always see a negative impact from that. Some people can get away with it because they're very naturally strong, and that's fantastic. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about you need to know what variables that you as an individual need to modulate to get the desired result. And like, there's a big, obviously, what's the word, debate between training to failure with using the reps in reserve, and I know that kind of blends into one now. And it's understanding, like, is this training volume something that you can recover from? Is it something that you can progress? And it's just being what's the word, very vocal with your coach, who I assume is a good coach, who can kind of go, right, okay, this isn't working, we need to change this, and just keeping in contact. And from what I'm aware, in prep, you tend to increase contact with your clients as they get close to that show date, because you need that kind of that hands-on data.
Yeah, for sure. I think that sometimes, it's underestimated from the client's point of view how valuable that is as a coach, for them to give you as much feedback as possible, in particular if they are in a prep, and if volume's too much or then feeling like they're really not recovering from it, you don't know unless they tell you, of course. And
yeah,
like you say, hopefully the coach is a good coach, because as we know, a bit like social media, there is a variance of people and there's a variance of coaches and what they can offer. But certainly, as from what I do as a coach, I want to know as much as possible. Actually, to be fair, in all phases, it's like, if something's not working,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So I think there's something that would be quite interesting to touch on, actually, just sprung to my mind, is when you see, for example, someone maybe with knee strap sleeves or elbow sleeves, or if we went with knee sleeves, and they're then going into a leg press and fully loading it and doing partial range, or this type of thing that you can see on social media, in the gym, whatever it may be. Do you have much experience with straps and assistance in that way?
Yeah, nothing extreme. So not wraps. I think that's the only thing I haven't used, or anything like a suit.
Yeah.
Like, I've used single ply and double ply knee sleeves, both in squatting. I use single ply knee sleeves at the moment. It's just nice. I've had, like, kind of, you could say knee issues in the past, and it's a little bit of extra security. I think just like you have phases where you rotate exercises in and out, you should probably have phases where you don't use something like assistance.
Yeah.
But I don't really think there's anything bad with them. If you want to go down the research route, I don't think there's any research that would say that using them is going to be detrimental in any way. I think the issue is more to what you touched upon, is like how much you're loading and how much range of motion you're doing and what control you're doing that with. That's always going to be the determining factor. And it's this kind of this massive gray area that you can't give absolutes to. But I would mostly just say you just need to control weight and take the ego out of it. And I would say bodybuilders are pretty good at doing that from a competitive standpoint. But it's like you're in a session with like two of your friends, and you're training for 3 hours straight. You're all doing the same exercise. You're all screaming at each other. Like that kind of like adrenaline and getting amped up is like I know what it's like, and you feel so good, and you're PBing every session. You've got a spotter there to help you through all the really hard reps. And then it's like you're sat on the train on the way home, and you're like, God, my lower back is like starting to flare up. What the fuck? And that's the thing you have to be aware of more than just than saying, oh, maybe I should just wear a belt. Like it's about what you're doing in the session.
Yeah. Belts are another sort of, along with the straps and that accessories, what you
I think
can.
they're fine. I think they're
Yeah.
fine. I don't think there's an issue. I think wraps are when you kind of go a little bit. I knew a bodybuilder who trained in my old gym. He used to wear like knee wraps for like doing 140 kilo squats for like 10 reps. And I'm like, fuck man, not even I did that when I powerlifted. So, and like if your knees are that fucked, like like sort it out. Like go see someone for that. Like change whatever you're doing. Like sort something out.
Yeah, that's my sort of undercurrent into the example I gave. You do, and you actually touched on it there, ego lifting per se. It is, and I've been there, I talk from experience, this isn't by no means me saying that's wrong, but we do get, sometimes the gym becomes your thing, it's the only thing you're doing for yourself. And then find this new like love for training, and then it's like, oh, I want to keep PBing. Okay, my knee hurts a bit. What I'll do is I'll put, some straps on it, or,
Yeah.
wraps or whatever. And then what I'll do is I'll continue to lift. But like you say there's the undercurrent of maybe you should look at treatment or getting that sorted as to why that is hurting when you're training, rather than it being you're training. So it's a muscle type hurt. It's like my knees are really hurting, but I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's so easily done though, isn't it? Because you just get so into it.
Yeah, you almost have to kind of talk yourself out of it, and that is where I think having a coach is a lot better, because you've got someone there who's completely impartial, who is hopefully working in your best interest, and go, no,
Yeah.
stop it now, we're swapping this out, or let's trial this before that, let's see what it does. It doesn't mean we need to sack off the movement completely or completely change everything. It's more like, okay, what are we actually doing before this? What does the rest of the week look like? And it's all the consistent variables we look at when we're coaching clients.
Yeah, and I think it's super important as well to respond to have a consult, or get the
Yeah.
data. What exercises do you like? What has worked for you in the past? I think that sometimes people might think, well, why do you need to know what training I'm doing now and what I have been doing? It's purely so that we as coaches have a background into, what's worked for them, what they actually like, rather than us going, well, I think this is going to be good for you. Just get on with it. You want to
Yeah.
Even if there's going to be certain things that you want to program that maybe they haven't loved before, but they're not adverse to doing them. If you can have a balance of exercise they like, and then ones that you feel are going to be beneficial, then of course they're going to be more inclined to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good opportunity to look at what those emotional attachments are. Even when it comes to like rehab, I had a client signed up a week ago, and he's had like kind of on and off hip pain, like issues with on the right side. And it's nothing that I can't screen online, and I can't go, cool, this is maybe the issue, we'll try this. And he was like, yeah, I used to do this like one cable exercise for like a year, and that really helped. And then I gave him the program, and I didn't put that in. And he's like, how come you haven't given me that? I was like, you did it a year, and you say it helped, but you're in the exact same position.
Yep.
Like, do you really think that helped? And even if it did, like, what's against doing these other things alongside that? See if that's going to improve. Do this first, and then we can put that in. And
Yeah,
it
that's
is about kind of being a little bit like, no, you need to think a little bit logically, which is quite hard to do when you program yourself. You tend to program more emotionally. You tend to program the movement patterns that you love, that you really connect with, and then you shy away from all the shit that you don't like doing because you're shit at it. And
yeah.
it's like, you need to do more of the shit that you're shit at.
Yeah, it's like the split squats example you gave earlier, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know many people that like them, as it were. I mean, I quite like them, but you know,
I think
it,
they're all right. They're fucking horrible, but they're good.
yeah, but you feel it, you know, I like to feel it, and it's not, you know, it's not something you have to load up massively and compromise posture. You know, you can really focus on feeling the movement, and then you
Yeah,
feel it after for however many days. And there is that sort of, I guess there's that instant, well, I suppose when you're training quads anyway, you know, like leg extension is my favorite exercise because you
yeah.
get that like, oh my God, I can really feel I'm working. And you know,
That's exactly it though, because you've got so the debate would be, you know, I can't load a split squat as much. Well, you've got other output exercises that you can do. You've got a leg press, leg extension. If you want output,
yeah,
like you only need two exercises in that case, especially if we're talking about quads in this example. There's
yeah,
like, but a split squat, we can look at like how much internal rotation, how much external rotation the hips going through as you load through the front foot. There are multiple variations. And if that improves your ability, your generic hip mobility, whatever the hell your issue is, and it
yeah,
makes those like leg presses or other multi-joint movements better, why wouldn't you do that? Just because it's not as high as output and you might not be getting as much hypertrophy stimulus, whatever you want to call it, from it, then but you can still get output from other exercises. Why wouldn't you do that? And it's this kind of like, oh, I'm not very good at it. Well, get better at it. That's
yeah.
all you have to do.
Yeah, yeah. And what you, I guess, touched on there as well is associating load with progression. You don't have to load something up. Yeah, every exercise doesn't need to be loaded heavily for you to progress. And I think there is that association, isn't there? Well,
Yeah,
I can't
100%.
lift
Yeah.
much. You know, I can't lift anything with that. Yes, but like you say, the other exercises that are working that muscle group, well, let's load them up. That different exercise selection across your program, across your mesocycle.
Yeah, no one wants to feel like a beginner. I think especially when you've been training for 3, 4 years, 10 years. Like no one wants to be given an exercise that you could look at and say, "Oh, this is quite easy," and then do shift. That's it. Even like when it comes to like some of the primers or like the quote unquote activation, whatever you want to call them. Well, I'm
Yeah,
like, cool, we're going to target this specific position. We're going to load that, and it's just going to be body weight with a bit of breathing. And they're like, "Oh, that's fucking lighten that up." And I'm like, well, cool. It's been underexposed for God knows how many years while you've been doing like 5 different kinds of presses.
yeah,
Now we need to focus on this because those 5 presses aren't going to go anywhere in the next 5 years' time if you don't work on this.
yeah.
Or we're going to see, I don't know, shoulder issues or whatever the hell is. You can't predict that, but you can make an assumption that cool, this is a limiting factor now. It's not going to go away by you just doing other things.
Yeah, yeah. That's, yeah, very relevant as sometimes people come to me, they've got a program and it a chest day, a back day, and
Yeah,
you know, there could be 6 to 8 exercises on one muscle group. And it's our job as coaches to give that tuition to say, well, actually, you know, what's going to be more effective for you is less exercises, concentrating on technique, load for those exercises. You know, I think sometimes it can really surprise people how little you can program and still get maximal results. I don't want to say
yeah,
it's not thinking, I guess, you know, what's the minimum you can get from the maximum benefit, but in the sense it is, because
yeah.
you don't need to go in the gym for 3 to 4 hours.
No, definitely not. And like it's what you said there with what you're getting out of what you're putting in. Like
Yeah,
it does exist on a continuum, and there are obviously a lot of other variables in place. But no, you don't need to do like ridiculous amounts of volume. Obviously, there are people who can again get away with that. I've seen some bodybuilders pull days, and there's like 5 rows, and I'm like, fuck,
yeah.
man.
How
And
the
I'm
fuck
like, I
do you do
kind
that?
of get your justification. I get your justification, but like after a while, this is more or less the same thing.
Yeah,
And I just look, and obviously, again, you can't. It's hard to argue because you see the physique and you go, well, at the end of the day, that's the thing. You're if you win the show, I'm like, can argue with it, but it's when you get people who argue over nuance, and I'm like, well, if you haven't won any shows, then like. I don't really care if you're arguing about stuff you're doing in the gym that you don't get judged on. You get judged on how you look. You don't get judged on how you train. You don't get judged on your leg extension. You don't get judged on, I don't know, fucking stability or like how much you can do cable crunch with. You get judged on the end result. So
yeah,
like, I don't think you need to have as much emotional weight for the things you're doing in the gym if you're looking for a different result on stage.
yeah. And this is where the tuition comes in. It's our job as coaches, if we're looking at bodybuilding, competing, you know, whatever route under that umbrella of bodybuilding, form the clients and help give that tuition to say, you know, this is an aesthetic based sport. So your exercise selection is going to be based on you looking your best. We're not talking about, like you say, what you lift in the gym. The judges don't give a shit, you know, they don't give a shit if you spend 5 hours in the gym. What they want to see is the best physique on stage, and that's a very, very relevant message that I think people often forget when they're hyper focused on PBing all the time or doing like something really fancy in the gym. A basic program with some good lifts, some different exercise selection across, you know, your training plan can be effective for most people.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm. And you touched on earlier about, you know, like primers or activations. What, you know, I call them a bit of both sometimes, depending on who I'm talking to. But with regards to sort of warm up sets, which is essentially what it is, do you have different guidelines depending on different clients, or do you have sort of something you follow in regards to warming up in relation to injury prevention as well?
Yeah, like I mean, if it comes to like kind of the smaller stuff that you do before your session,
Yeah.
like you want to get to a point where you don't have to do it because no one wants to like do, I don't know, external rotations before the session, whatever the hell
Yeah.
you feel is needed. Warm-ups is you should have an idea of what a rough working weight is going to be. You can spend a little bit of time working up towards that. There's no kind of set skill. It's the same way if you want to go back to that deadlift, you've got 140 kilos, do the empty bar for a few RDLs, do 60, do 100. You just make those logistical weight jumps, but you want to be taking feedback on those weight jumps of, okay, is this actually feeling good? And like, you know, you have those days where you get to like, say, 85% of your working weight, and you're like, this is just not moving today. And it's just like, it feels like shit. And that could be for multiple reasons. You could be due a deload, you could have just had like a bit of an off day with sleep, and it could just be a complete fluke. It's the same way that like random injuries and random pain just does appear, and there is genuinely no explanation. And then you also have days where it's like, wow, this is like my warm up is flying. Like I'm 5 kilos below my previous working weight, and the 2 reps I did of that absolutely flew. Cool, I can probably put it up a little bit today. How much you do is depending on how you're feeling. You can go for like you probably don't want to overshoot it, so it's probably good to err in the way of caution, and then you just have to take it as it goes, trial and error.
Yeah, for sure. And where you mentioned their deloads, this is something again, you know, it's almost, I suppose, a bit like biomechanics, you know, it's increased in people hearing about what a deload is. You know, some people
Yeah,
they've never even heard of a deload and they're like, well, what the hell's that? And actually, you know, when you start to look at when a deload would be appropriate as a coach, you know, whether you progress over a meso and then you program in a deload ahead of time, or you touch base and say, do we push for another week, then we deload, or however it is, it's, well, 100% feedback from me is from my clients is, fucking hell, I needed that deload, and they come back stronger.
yeah. I think it's again, some people can just push programs for a very long period of time and not have an issue. Like I personally haven't needed to deload for a while, but then I have like my current schedule and life situations probably forces those deloads.
Yeah.
So it's not something I would go, cool, this exact week I am going to be working at whatever capacity, like 8%, deload. It's more like, okay, I'm busy as fuck for 4 days. Those sessions are not going to be good sessions. And then I'm just going to go straight back into the program there. Like the body is not this kind of robotic thing. With bodybuilders, because again, you work on a bit more of a schedule and a timeline, especially if you're an online coach and you've got a very good handle of your own diary compared to someone who works 9 to 5 and has like other commitments. It is easier to do that. And if you can get more out of that, then that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's different ways you can do it. You can do like the week, you can do 10 days. I've seen people just take 4 days off. I really don't think there's like a set standard of what you can do. And I know coaches have their preferences, and it's mostly just what feels ideal. I personally just take a couple of days off. I'll have like 3 or 4 days where I'll just fuck around in the gym for a little bit. I'll
Yeah.
go in, get a pump. I'll probably still train hard on like kind of the smaller muscle groups that don't really get taxed. As long as I haven't got any kind of, yeah, exactly. As long as I don't have any kind of like connective tissue issues around that area that have been built up from the previous phase. And then I'm like, cool, everything feels good. New program, done.
Yeah, I like to give options as well, similar to what you're saying there. You know, I'll say, okay, so deload we're going to plan for, you know, whatever week it's going to be. So either we could plan that away with going away on holiday or something like that. That's
Yeah,
sometimes,
that's a great one. That's a
yeah,
fantastic one, I think. Yeah.
ideal, because as a bodybuilder myself, you know, if I'm on holiday, and Matt and I would go on loads of walks and adventures and stuff like that, so I'm not thinking, oh, I really miss the gym. So that's, you know, a really good option. And of course you can come away from the gym environment and not feel bad. You can sort of do
Yeah.
something nice. Or say, similar to what you said, do you want to go in and maybe instead of 5 weight sessions, you could do 2 or 3 pump sessions and go for enjoyment, you know, use the smaller muscle groups, 60 to 70% of load, maybe a couple of sets per exercise. Or someone is at that point where they're like, I'm pretty fucked, you know, it might be that we can take a week off. And if there's still things like cardio programmed in for them, you know, if they're in a diet phase, they can go and do the cardio, maybe lay off the weights for a week and come back a bit stronger. But it is very person dependent. But I definitely feel that there is a place for most people to deload at some point.
Yeah, I think the only time I personally don't think you need to do those if you're like classic Gen Pop client, because your lifestyle will do that for you. Like if you're training 2 times a week with a PT, you really don't need to do that. Like, I mean, you can train people fucking hard over 2 sessions. Like I've
Yeah, yeah.
definitely done that, but I've never got to a stage where I'm like, yeah, we're gonna go easy this week, unless they've had like a horrible week and it's been like, you know, they haven't slept,
Yeah.
like, you know, lifestyle factors, kids, whatever. Like, cool, you're obviously not going to be hitting maximum capacity training today. We're going to pull it back. It doesn't mean it's a deload. It's just we're doing the same thing that everyone else does. That we're also regulating our training volume and intensity based on how we're feeling. But yeah, those are the main situations where I'd say you probably do not need to deload.
Yeah. And of course it depends, like you said there, you know, what phase they're in. You know, if someone is,
Yeah,
you know, potentially in a fairly long diet, you know, things like a deload can help manage that diet fatigue. You know, there's potential to add. I've done like a refeed week on a deload week with clients, and they've come off the back of that. You know, hunger's come down, they're feeling better, sleep is a little bit better. You know, there's strategic things that we can do as coaches to try and help people that are, you know, committing to a long diet phase, whether that's Gen Pop or, you know, competitors. But it is our job to, you know, look for these signs. And that's, of course, I'm sure you do a similar thing. Ask about sleep, stress levels, all of those things. How does your training feel for a start?
yeah. You're just kind of getting them to spin plates, and then you're trying to figure out which of the plates are important. That's all you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to sleep, you know, I would say that's a fairly big factor in to the subject today of injury prevention. You know, it's something I've touched on the pod before, but is there any advice, anything we could delve into today that would be, you know, general advice for competitors or Gen Pop people that are considering sleep as something that they want to work on?
Yeah, sleep's an interesting one. I mean, most of the advice I would say is very much the same, which is, you know, don't look at your screen before bed.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if you've done this. Like, I've had phases where I've been like absolutely fucking on it with like all the things I can do, and I definitely saw like a decent improvement. But I was the most boring person in existence. Like it was just like, don't look at your phone before bed. You're not watching TV before bed. You know, you're not eating 1.5 to 2 hours before bed, which is fucking hard when you're busy. Like
Isn't it?
it is impossible. But
Yeah.
and it's like, you know, don't drink fluids an hour before bed. I'm just like, oh great, okay. Basically, I can't do anything
I'm
an hour before
thirsty.
I go to sleep.
Yeah.
Like the external stuff, I think actually is really useful. So things like earplugs, blackout blinds, I think they do make a big difference. Like hot shower before bed, like a cool room. I would probably focus on that more because that's something that's very easily controllable
Yeah.
and that doesn't really get fucked up by like curveballs in your lifestyle. So
Yeah.
I would focus on that more. And then like if you can kind of try not to look at your phone in bed, I'd say 99% of people still do. Like it's just gonna happen. And I know like there are like Andrew Huberman has become really popular lately with like his videos on like sleep and neuroscience, and it's like it's great because you can go, cool, in a lab, this is what happens when you're on your phone. Da, da, da. I'm like, cool. In real life, people are going to be on the phones. Don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to happen. Like I'm not going to tell my like, you know, 45-year-old client who works all hours, oh, by the way, don't do your job for the last hour of the day, even if a really important client is messaging you, because, you know, we need that sleep score to be pretty high, you know, so we can do a push up the next day. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And of course, it's working it within your lifestyle, which is the undercurrent there. It's sometimes it might be that if you can facilitate not going on your phone an hour before bed, and sometimes I can do that, but generally as an online coach, and actually,
Doesn't happen.
yeah, even family and stuff like that, it's very hard to avoid looking at your phone all the time. But what I've certainly found recently is that if I can do my last check on my phone and then read for like 20 minutes in bed, that really helps to sort of set the tone for me. And I've had my bath and whatever, done a bit of yoga, check my phone, and then read in bed. That works for me. And I think before, like, I've done exactly like you've just described there, all of those things, blue light blockers, everything possible. And actually my sleep was probably worse because I was so stressed if I was doing it right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
And of
completely agree
course,
on that.
yeah. And if you have like a social occasion come up, I remember when I first started doing my sleep routine, the first social occasion, I was like, shit, what am I going to do? Like, I can't wear my blue light blockers. I can't like not drink fluid. I'm having a Diet Coke at 9:30. What am I going to do? In regards to sleep, would you, if someone was, I guess, a client, they had a really bad night's sleep and they were feeling pretty ropey, what would you say in regards to training? Do you have sort of a gauge where you can go, okay, well, do you feel X, Y, and Z, or?
Yeah, it's so when I used to have this a lot with my one-to-one sessions when I was in London, it was mostly just like how are we actually feeling? How
Yeah,
are the warm-ups feeling, like energy-wise? Like what actually was the circumstance? Was it literally I didn't sleep at all, or I had like, I got woken up a couple of times because like kids or whatever. And then if we're not in a good position, like we're really not feeling it, again, this is probably a bit more in line with Gen Pop than bodybuilding. I'd be like, cool, I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. So I want to like get some endorphins going, get some blood flow going, just get these joints moving, get you out your desk, give you an hour of like, okay, I'm not feeling too shit. And then like you can do those more fun movements or whatever the hell it is and not absolutely kill them. If you're a competitive athlete, then it's just one of those things where it's like you can fight for those progressions in that day. I personally wouldn't recommend it. The times when you see people get injured more in like kind of a higher level of competitivism is when people are distracted and like their head's not really in it, like they're handling heavy loads, and it's like, well, if you're handling heavy loads, you need to be down focused or you need to be in a good position. And if you're not, like the weight will tell you that. So it's one of those days where it's like, cool, if you can match what you did last week and you don't have to grind for it,
yeah,
great. If you have to grind for it, then nope, pull that weight down and take that session as a loss. It's fine. It happens. It's like, like 0.01% of your training cycle, whatever the hell it is. And then you just go home, chill, and try not to repeat.
yeah. Because of course there is, generally most, even when you're in a prep, there's going to be rest days across the week. So it's maybe, do you that day, if you're feeling really shit, you go to gym and it's just not happening, can you then take that session over, as it were, speak to your coach as well and say what's the best thing to do here? And similar in regards to with the warm-ups with cool downs, is there anything in particular that you recommend? Because I remember right back when I qualified as a PT, it was like you need to stretch every major muscle group for 30 to 60 seconds, and now no one stretches. What would you say is sort of guidance in regards to that?
I think cooldowns they're more related to like people who have like heart issues. You basically don't want the heart rate to drop too high. Also, like I mean, it's you're probably increasing blood pressure a lot if you're working at high intensity. Your heart rate probably isn't shooting up that much for a long period of time. It's probably going to gradually come back down quite frequently. It is quite cool to actually wear a heart rate monitor while you do like a heavy leg session because you're going to see that kind of spike and dip and spike and dip. But it is probably going to average out. I have had sessions where I've had to cool downs with clients because they've just been fucked. But this is clients who have been at a level they're just very unfit and they haven't been exposed to like higher heart rates. I don't think it's that much of an issue. If you want to walk on a treadmill for 5 minutes, fine. Well, I don't think it's going to be an issue. The whole point is we just want the blood to start. We want the heart rate to drop steadily and not just go from I don't know 160 down to 80.
Yeah, because of course, again, I've been there, you probably have, right back at the start. I prioritize, okay, so I've got 5 minutes left. What I do is
Yeah,
I do one more heavy set because I'm a dick and I'm lifting with ego, and then I'll just rush out the gym. And then like you sort of get in the car, get to your destination. You're like, if it's like, it could even be something like a bloody deadlift, and then I get to the thing and think I can't move my lower back. But it's that priority of, can I get one more working set in, rather than, why don't I just be a bit more safe and effective?
Yeah, definitely.
It's so easily done, isn't it? Because of course, the undercurrent is, you care about your training, you want to do well, but sometimes it's maybe taking a slightly outsider's point of view and going, well, actually, what's going to be effective for me? And I think that's probably what we've, in summary, spoken about today. Ideally, working with a coach that can give the expertise to program in and be that outsource of, doing the best for you and programming to help you achieve your goals, but also, not being a dick, trying to enjoy training, get results, and, stick to it rather than flitting around and doing everything that everyone else is doing. This is a journey that should be based on you as an individual.
Yeah, I think especially with bodybuilding, it's like you have to look the part, like it's your entire life, and like it's everything matters around it. You have to, like, walk the walk, as they say, and you can, but there are many, many bodybuilders that you see who are a very high competitive standard who do not take training as seriously as like some of the elite ones. Like if you look at like Ultraflex Rotherham's page, like the list of the things you see on there, I'm like, cool, like you clearly train hard. This is clearly your life, absolutely fine. But you don't need to do that
Yeah.
to be good. You can maybe argue there's some discrepancy when we're talking at people who are like always hitting first place. That's not something I'm that experienced in, but it doesn't need to be your entire life.
Yeah, and again, you don't know the genetic individual, you don't know
Yeah,
they're assisted, something that I think can be underestimated sometimes. Especially, I have a lot of first timers listen to the podcast, and maybe they're slightly naive to, the assisted realm, if they're natural, and what that would look like, what that would do with training performance, and what that would do to the aesthetic physique. There's so much there, but it is, you got to focus on your own journey, and we're only given what we've got. You can only do a
yeah,
certain amount, and like you say, it's very relevant to, if someone's doing this as a job and they're a professional athlete, it's very different to, someone doing it as a hobby, and
yeah.
you know jumping in to compete and seeing how they get on, and then hopefully pursuing that if they find a love for it. But if you're not doing it as a job, it's a very different setup, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a hell of a lot less pressure if it's not a job. Like, and if your life does revolve around that, if your income sponsors, then like you can understand why there is so much emotional weight behind the way these guys train, like what they do on in their downtime, off season, in season, everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to be able to do it as a job, of course, Josh.
Yeah, of course.
I'm always like, that's a pretty sick job, but again, we don't know what goes into it. But yeah, I think this would be a very good episode for people to just get a bit more understanding into training, particularly as an individual. And if anyone did have any questions or resonated with anything we've gone through today, Josh, is it best to find you on Instagram if they wanted to give you a follow?
Yeah, Instagram's the best place. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's Coach with a K.
yeah. Coach Car with also with a K.
Why not? Why not? Thank you so much for your time, mate. And perhaps, in the future we could get you on for another episode.
Oh, definitely. I'm always up for ranting about.
Thank you, my friend. I will speak to you soon.
See you.
Bye.